My name is Erin and I read everything. So here's a list of all of my favorite fiction books of all time. And I also thought it would be a really cool way for me to just kind of intro my reading taste to BookTube and just share with you what rocks my boat. This list is a combination of general fiction, romance, thriller, pretty much everything except fantasy and horror. These are the books that have just stolen my heart over the years. And if anyone were to ask me would I recommend these books, it would be an absolute resounding hell yes. Lamb, The Gospel According to Biff by Christopher Moore had me in stitches and then in tears. This was every bit as ridiculous and heartwarming as I thought it was going to be. This fictional character named Biff felt so very real to me, and he just was stuck into my heart by the end of this book. This is one I could absolutely see myself rereading in the future. And if you've got some space for a little humor in your spirituality, I think this is an absolute read. The Book of Night Women by Marlon James is one that I read over 15 years ago, and this one just really stuck with me as well. I think this was one of the first fiction stories that I read around the narrative of women in slavery. It was heartbreaking, it was eye-opening, and while I found myself feeling sad and angry a lot of the times, I just thought the story was just an absolute masterpiece. A Little Life is a book that I read because of all the hype that this book got. Now, I admit I did pick up the book because I just wanted to see what everybody was so distraught about. While this book didn't move me personally to tears, this was just one of the most gut-wrenching stories that I've ever read. But I think the most beautiful part of this story is the layers around the main character's support system and what it looks like to have someone in your core inner circle suffer from severe depression, which is really what this book is about, is supporting people, conditional and unconditional love, depression, suicide awareness. There's so many layers to this, more than just beyond what happens to the main character. This is an absolutely beautiful story, and I originally felt like when I finished this book, I would never want to read this again, but this is one that I feel called over and over again to revisit. And if you can handle it, I would absolutely recommend it. One of my most favorite listened to audiobooks is George Orwell's 1984. I am in love with this story. Dystopian fiction is one of my favorite subgenres, and this story captures groupthink, Stockholm syndrome, integrity, loyalty. This is a masterclass on all of those things. Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn is one of the first thrillers that had my jaw on the freaking floor. I thought this book was a masterclass in how to write unlikable characters. So many times when I read books with unlikable characters, that's intentional. The story is just awful. Like, you can't have unlikable characters and then an unlikable plot too. But this one, ooh, perfection. Now, I'm not really a romance girly. It's one of those sections in the bookstore that I will just walk right past unless I am looking for something very specific. And I just decided to give it a go because I needed a palate cleanser at the time. And I loved Damian's Windsor. This was a beautiful story. It's not that long, but it features two very emotionally healthy characters, amazing familial relationships, the support that these characters had when dealing with an external problem was just beautiful. And this is a strangers to lovers theme. And I just recommend this story so much. Queenie sent me into an absolute rage. This is another story that was a 5-star read for me, but I hated the main character. Now, when I say I hated her, I felt like she had a very realistic storyline in just navigating your 20s and just figuring out who you are, dealing with trauma that you don't know you had, strained family relationships, unhealthy self-esteem issues, and just trying to navigate the daily complexities of life and doing so extremely imperfectly. I found Queenie, the character, to be manifested in such a real way that I would be driving, listening to the audio, and just like screaming at the speaker, like, girl, please get your ish together, please. But this book just sent me into orbit. This was an excellent story if you can hang in there with a frustrating main character. Perfect Peace by Daniel Black is a heartbreaking story about gender identity, and seeing this in a historical context made it even that much more complex. This is a heartbreaking story. It's a very difficult read, but if you're interested in gender fluidity, gender identity, when it comes to the Black community and those extra layers of complexity specific to that community, this is a must read. Matter of fact, even if you're not interested in it, this is a wonderful story, period. Fredrik Backman's Anxious People really stole my heart as well. I thought that I was going to be reading kind of a fiction with a mystery subplot, but this was really just about the complexities of life. You've got a mixed match of characters all dealing with relatable topics, personal demons, and just the day-to-day struggle to relate to one another. And I thought this story was so beautifully well done, and it was very unique in its own way. And this is one that I would absolutely see myself rereading and would recommend to everyone. Donald Goines' Dopefiend is a hard-hitting urban fiction set in the 70s that I do believe I bawled my eyes out when I read. As a matter of fact, I've read all but maybe 2 of Goines' catalog, and if you're an urban fiction reader, it is a must-read. The grittiness of poverty, drug abuse, mental health is all wrapped up in a very gritty story. Addicted by Zane is much more than an erotic thriller. And you're walking with your main character, just watching her life unravel because she can't control her sex addiction. And yes, you're going to get a lot of erotica, a lot of spicy scenes. This is much more complex than that. Our main character's sex addiction leads her into a fatal attraction with the wrong person, and her life just unravels in the most devastating way. This is an amazing story. And last but not least, my favorite book of all time, Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. This was a gift from a friend like 20 years ago, and I only read this book because I knew that my friend was going to ask me about it. And my God, 20 years later, this is the best book I have ever read. This is nothing like any book that I would have ever voluntarily picked up from a store. Like, this was so much more than just a romance, but this is a written example of unconditional love. A female main character who life has just happened to her. She has had horrible things happen to her. She finds herself in some really bad situations. And at some point, she just gives up on herself and doesn't think that she is worthy of love. And she finds redemption in herself, redemption through love, and just redemption in how she sees herself as a woman. I don't remember the details of this book, and I have purposely waited to kind of forget the details because, like I said, it's been 20 years since I read this book. I purposely waited until details were foggy so I can go back into this book and make it feel like the first time that I read it. But this is my absolute favorite book ever, and I absolutely recommend this to any and everyone who is willing to read it. So that's my list. It gives you a taste of what I read. So I want to know from you, what's your favorite book of all time? It would be a great way for me to get to know you as BookTube members. And hopefully we can use these comments as a way to find our new favorite read.